Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor, Greg Dooley, and the Pundit, Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
That's right, it's the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. We're presented by Nick Hopwood, who's a certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. Greg, we had an all-time record of listeners to our podcast last week. Good to see you, first of all. How are you?
Great. Thank you to the listeners. You're right. And a big shout out to my man, Nick Hopwood and Peak Wealth Management for sponsoring us. And a message out there, if you are a company that you think have an authentic fit with this brand, with our podcast, and you want to know more, we're easy to find. Reach out to me. This is Dooley, of course, and we'll have a conversation about it. Also, reminder that we are included in the Autograph app, the new app sponsored by Tom Brady that collaborates a lot of the best Michigan content and rewards you for your fandom. In fact, here's a few words from the GOAT himself.
Maize and Blue Nation, it's Tom Brady. I co-founded Autograph with one mission in mind: change the fan experience for the better. That's why I'm excited to announce the release of a new app that recognizes the biggest Michigan fans. The Autograph Fandom app gives you access to the best Michigan content, fan challenges, and exclusive rewards for diehard Wolverines, all for doing the things you already do, like listening to this podcast. Head over to the Apple App Store and search for Autograph Rewarding Fans and download today.
If you're interested in signing up and getting the Autograph app, the link is right in our podcast notes. And the referral code, which you need, is Prof Pun, PROFPUN.
Very good, Greg. Now, one of the reasons why we had that many listeners, of course, is what we're calling the big elephant in the room.
What do you mean?
It's sort of hijacking the Michigan on-field results, where the Wolverines are 8-0, just coming off a bye week, but everybody in the country is talking about the biggest news in college football, and that involves Michigan. A lot has happened since our last podcast. We now have a firm getting access to a shared drive. We've also found out more about the personality of Connor Stalions that everybody is ripping on. And over the weekend, we have a Division III coach that says he was hired by Connor Stalions directly to attend and video games at Penn State University. Greg, let's tackle them one piece at a time.
Well, and I'll add other devices as well apparently have been obtained and reviewed. That's what we hear.
The NCAA has been in Ann Arbor as well.
Yeah, so first of all, Connor Stalions is getting ripped on for this manifesto, which was apparently his plan to take over Michigan football or something like that. And he's getting teased quite a bit and ripped on. I think it's kind of awesome. I think we should all have a manifesto in our lives. Hey, Steve, Western civilization was founded in a manifesto. It's called the Bible. And you know who else got a show cause? JC. A really harsh one.
Yeah, a 500, 600-page manifesto is long. I've put my thoughts down on paper before, but not 500 to 600 pages worth where I'm plotting to take over the world.
It's a little strange. It actually probably, in a weird way, helps Michigan if you want to peg this guy.
I think it does.
Yeah, so I'm someone who writes a lot. I journal. I have well over that many pages in my journal entries. I wouldn't call it a manifesto, though, Steve. It's more of a reflection.
Have you read any of this? I haven't, and I don't want to. But
No.
Have you read any of it?
I didn't even know it was available. I want to read it.
There is a picture being painted towards him, and I do think it helps the University of Michigan.
Like he's absolute extreme end, wild card, rogue, intense manifesto writing in a cave kind of person. Therefore, maybe actually he did act alone or kind of alone.
There's a couple of things that have come out. Some are public, and I want to encourage people to go to the MichiganInsider.com to learn more about what Sam Webb is reporting. And some of this is subscription-based for him, so I want to be careful not to mention things that are proprietary for him. That wouldn't be fair. It went on the airwaves Monday morning with the Monday Morning Quarterback with Devin Gardner, who he appears on with Sam at 9 a.m. on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, where he says, yeah, we all know who Connor Stalions is. I mean, this guy was everywhere, home, away, near the bus before and after games, trying to talk to people as much as he can to share information. It appears that he has been going to every home game, every road game, every bowl game. You've got to have a lot of money to be able to do that. So this has been going on since 2013, at the end of Devin Gardner's tenure as a player at Michigan football, and has continued throughout until he was officially hired in 2022. Makes you wonder that maybe he has this money already somehow.
I'm going to go ahead and assume that people knew about his plans and some of this stuff was expense. I'm going to assume the worst with his activity, involvement, and what he shared or tried to share with the staff about what he was doing. I don't know that extends up to Harbaugh, Steve, but I take a little bit of a different take. And I heard more is coming, more evidence of details of where and when people were involved with filming and in the way it was. So
it is a slow drip of information, that is for sure, and it's intentional. It is intentional not to dump everything out. It is intentional to have a slow drip that comes out day by day, where this is the worst case scenario that's being presented, and there is no other logical explanations being presented at all.
You say that it's intentional, and I wonder if the timing was intentional. Interesting, right before a rivalry game.
To me, Greg, Michigan is going to get dinged. It's just a question of how much. And though we haven't really seen anything, it's appearing more and more that 2 NCAA violations have occurred. And I contend, which many people will disagree, and this isn't a major violation. You can steal signs. It's just that you can't go to this place to actually do it, but you can actually access all the film and video need to do what apparently is legal to do. It's up in the air how much Michigan football knew about it, but by rule, Harbaugh will be held responsible for anyone doing anything wrong within the program, even if there's ignorance. So I think that's one reason why you can get dinged. A second reason is because the NCAA is already investigating Michigan, and even minor offenses after that can be expanded exponentially. This is my own personal theory, and I don't have investigative facts behind me, that it's possible that a young man with a bunch of money, funded by parents, is able to travel back and forth, do all these things on his own dime, and when one anonymous coach tells Yahoo over the weekend that Michigan should be held accountable for their sheer stupidity, and that's a quote, perhaps it's an indication to me that this isn't the vast network being led by a mastermind with an elaborate sign stealing scheme, that this just may be one guy who didn't know the rules and went ahead and did what he did. There is nothing elaborate to me. He just went and bought tickets and hired people to film games.
Okay, and I think probably what happened was he was doing that for a while, and it was his idea and his funding, and then he showed the coaches or somebody that there's value here, and they got on board with it, and somebody did, is my assumption. But that at some point he showed value in this experiment that he did. There is grounds to ask a bunch of questions and make the NCAA, I think, quiver a little bit. Yeah, when they go back in the judges' chambers, metaphorically, the judge is like, you know this means this, and then you can say, well, maybe you should have defined it a little clearer. But, Steve, we also had a little more detail of some people involved. Our good friend John Bacon got thrown right in the mix of this. Cool.
Yeah.
So can you kind of break this down? It's really interesting. And we got a threat, really, that legal action might be taken against our man Bake. So tell us about
Sure.
that.
So we met with John at Black Rock. John was taking part in the pregame show.
Right.
And you were there in attendance. We were talking afterward. Everybody's sharing their thoughts on what they know, what they don't know. We learned that John went onto a Columbus radio station, 97.1 in Columbus, where out of the blue, it would appear, no pun intended, that John would bring up Jim Stapleton's name as a key factor to look into the future. Well, that attracted attention. So it was posted just about everywhere. The audio was set out, and we're reminded about who Jim Stapleton is.
Tell us, because there's probably some people listening that don't know this guy's kind of history here. Yeah.
So Jim Stapleton has a deep relationship with the University of Michigan back in the past. He was also with Eastern Michigan University. There is accusations that Jim Stapleton was in part behind the Rich Rodriguez NCAA investigation back in 2008 over PracticeGate. Too many hours in practice. Detroit Free Press working to build that story up.
In other words, supported the investigation perhaps from the inside out, basically is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then John reminded people that Jim Stapleton is a minority board member with the Minnesota Vikings, that he was responsible for the one that turned Jim Harbaugh from like thinking he had the job to not having the job. That too is somewhat in dispute. And even over the weekend, I had a story come out over my wire that says, an anonymous source, that Jim Stapleton was never on board with the Minnesota Vikings, but that wasn't substantiated by anybody. I mean, Jim Stapleton, let's just say, is a controversial figure, and it was loud enough where Jim Stapleton had to write out a response.
Right. He called Bacon a writer, in quotes, as if to, suggest he's not really a journalist or an actual writer. He used the word yellow journalism, which of course is, which he could have gone with maize. Maize journalism, Steve?
You call it corn. We called it maize.
No. If you know Bacon, to be accused basically of writing and spreading information just to get headlines and make a big sensation, that cuts right to his core. I know Bakes, okay. And I think John likes to get attention for the things he writes and the stories, but he's grounded in the principles behind honorable journalism. So I think Stapleton knew that would be a cut at him. What else do we have you seen in the media that caught your eye?
The Buckeyes in the Twitterverse want their pound of flesh.
Yeah.
That is absolutely for sure. And any Michigan football fan who has Twitter generally is probably following other Michigan football people, which means you'll get related feeds from Ohio State people or MSU people you don't need or want to see. My advice is this for all the people that see just incessant Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, social media posts, is that you need to separate the talking heads from the random social media post from somebody you don't know. You just need to be able to separate as a person who is just spouting off and as a person who's an actual talking head who's paid to have opinions.
That's great advice. But your point is, as the narrative is kind of building out and people are tweeting images and things like this and stating them as fact, you got to be careful here not to get wrapped around the axle.
Not everybody who's posting something with video and captions and conclusions and doesn't mean that they're a paid professional doing this. This is just somebody potentially at home. So separate the talking heads from a random social media post. Then separate the investigative reporting from the talking heads. That's two different things. Talking heads are paid to have opinions. Talking heads don't necessarily have to have all the facts behind them when they come out with an opinion.
Maybe they should, but go ahead.
Yeah, and you can have your favorite people. If you're a Michigan person, you're loving what Colin Cowherd has to say.
And Klatt too, right? And of course, let's be honest, Steve. I mean, these guys are company men and always have been for Fox. Right? I'm not saying what they're saying is wrong or I disagree with it, but you've got to take it with a grain of salt, in fairness.
And then there's that other aspect, the way you feel like you're being hammered by everybody else.
Yeah.
I'm just saying you need to separate the investigative reporting.
I think it's smart.
From the talking heads and columnists who are paid to have opinions and not come with something weak. And then finally, evaluate what the investigative reporters are actually saying. And realize that when you break it down, that a lot of these daily reports from slow drips of information are more sizzle than they are steak. And if you can do that, then it might be able to help you get through the day. Because the most information and feedback I get is from other people are saying, how do I stop from losing my mind? Take a look at what's being said and see if it's more sizzle than steak. Let's look at an article that came out over the weekend from USA Today called Why Bruce Feldman Says Michigan Football Sign-Stealing Evidence Would Be, quote, damning if proven. When you read that article from top to bottom, and it includes the Twitter quote and the speech that was played on Fox News Saturday's pregame show, it takes a long time to say that dozens of coaches that Bruce Feldman has interviewed over the week said it would be damning if the info was accurate.
Yeah.
There's not really a why in this. Because this is like building a story, Greg, that says a liar is a liar if it's proven that he's a liar.
Yep.
So what new information really is there? But that's one that's generating a lot of clicks.
So credit to Eric Adelson along those lines. If you heard him last week on the Michigan Insider on WTKA, he's the former ESPN He's fantastic. Now he teaches a journalism class down in Florida, and I got to say, he kind of teed off on Harbaugh and the situation and Harbaugh's responsibility, and he was grilled a little bit about it, and it's still on the coaching staff if this happened. But then he turned his ire to the journalists, and he was clearly upset about it. And he knows some of these people personally. They weren't doing the things he said that were fair, which is you have to present the other side at the top of the story if you're making a factual reference, and you have to have facts. And what they're doing is they're using harsh words in the headline. They're making kind of a quasi-accusation, and then they're stuffing this turkey, this story, with things that aren't illegal to almost, set up this picture of this horrible thing that's happening without providing a fair assessment of, no, this isn't illegal, this is illegal. They're just lumping it all together, presumably to get eyeballs, Steve, which it's tough. Being on this side of it, it's hard to see. And this is what happens in politics all the time and other things. And we're seeing it rearing its ugly head on us right now.
So where does Michigan compliance come in within all of this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So just understand this, and I'll use my words carefully, but there is a check and balance, almost contentious, right, relationship between what is compliance, which is a specific group at Michigan, right? There's people, they're trained lawyers, they're very competent, and they're there to protect not only Michigan's reputation, but legally and all these other things. The best example, Steve, is from cop shows, right? There's the police, the athletic teams and stuff, and then there's internal affairs, right, where it's supposed to be an independent watchdog of what you're doing. In a place like Michigan that espouses to be what we're supposed to be, right, go blue, leaders and best, that's how it's supposed to work. So what specifically they can and look at, they should have access to everything, barring rights and personal information that would break federal and state laws. They should have access to what goes on in the athletic department, yes, financially. And if they don't have the resources they feel to do the right investigation, that's when they bring in an independent law firm to do an independent audit, just like you'd bring in a big accounting firm, right, to do an audit for you if you're in a business. And from a fan's perspective, I get it. You're like, well, we want to win. Okay, we want to win the right way. Michigan does, right? And there's reasons for that. The reputation of the athletic department as it goes to development, marketing, all our slogans, it all comes from football, frankly, and the athletic program. So they want to protect the brand. They want to do it the right way. Go ahead.
And more conversations about that, as you mentioned, can be found in the previous podcast. Just look in the show notes to see where things specifically are laid out. But I got to say, back in season 1, the first few episodes, we were talking about the relationship between the compliance department and the football department. I have a question for you that I don't know the answer. Does compliance look at expenditures?
If they need to look at expenditures to do their job, they look at expenditures.
And does $15,000 in expenditures, which is what people are reporting is the sum of money being spent on tickets and allegedly hiring people to go to these games to video throughout the course of the season, is that an expenditure that draws any questions from anybody? Because it's a $100 million plus football budget. Where does $15,000 rank?
Knowing this place, I'm guessing $15,000, if it's a line item, is absolutely looked at. I can tell you, man, from what I understand, they look incredibly sharply at details of expenses that aren't already contemplated in the budget. I'm telling you, man, that's my experience. Mm-hmm. And I have more experience talking to people involved with the other teams. Would they look at it? If there's a problem or there's a question, they're definitely going to look at it. You say, yeah, $15,000 in I think it's less than a $100 million budget, but let's just use $100 million. Yeah, it's going to get looked at. Let's say Ohio State was bribing a ref for $10,000. Their internal compliance department would look at everything and say, well, let me see all your expenses. Now, could this be buried under a general, all the food, all this other stuff, or maybe expended? But I have a feeling there's a straight line to where that would fit and if it was reimbursed, probably down to counter Stalions and probably access to some type of expense account. If you think $15,000 doesn't matter materially to the football department, you're right. Do you think our athletic department ignores numbers like that? They don't. That's my take.
I think it's one of the keys to find out what happens to Michigan in the future and how much they're going to get punished.
But see, it doesn't look like they were trying to hide anything. It doesn't look like counter Stalions had some covert operation going on at least the way he presented it publicly on Venmo,
Right.
ignorance. This comes up in my classes sometimes, right? Like a student makes a mistake and it's so over the top bad of a mistake that sometimes I go, ignorance is actually is a little bit of a defense here, because that does seem to be the way he operated, was publicly. As far as I could tell, Steve, I mean, it doesn't seem like this was a shadowy operation.
There are a lot of people over the last couple of weeks who are trying to make 1 + 1 = 3 and 2 × 3 = 5.
Tell me.
I think there's a lot of people out there seeing the same evidence that we are. They talk about how elaborate it is. They talk about a vast network of many people putting this together, and then they're being accused of being so sheerly stupid that they need to be punished for their stupidity.
Which is it?
Because writers and broadcasters have gone out on a limb on a daily basis to remind people of the elaborate scheme with a vast network. They'll appear foolish if they backtrack when there's a distinct possibility that it could be quite simply involving a couple of people. Like, the downtown bank was robbed overnight by a vast network of technically savvy people with an elaborate scheme to steal the cash without the alarms alerting authorities. The alarm company could face bankruptcy if it's proven if either their software or their hardware malfunctioned. But after a 2-week investigation, it turns out the evening cleaning crew just forgot to turn on the alarms when they left. Meanwhile, the news is investigating the hiring practices and questioning the degree of the CEO and its alarm developers over a 2-week period. If Connor Stalions acted alone and or didn't know what he was doing was wrong, or if Michigan coaches simply didn't question how Stalions was arriving had his intel, it might make sense. But that doesn't make the reporters look good now. Instead, Stalions' easy-to-see paper trailed and shared network files instead will be portrayed as brazen, or as a poorly executed plan by the head coach and one of his minions.
And this goes back to me assuming the worst, which is that can be traced and that can be found. And then at some point, you'd like to go, well, okay, fine. What did this actually mean on the field? I think Michigan, what are we being accused of? We think we're starting to get what we think we'll be accused of. We don't know the level of allegations, which you pointed out last time. But Michigan should have a chance to defend itself. And that will kind of hopefully get some clarity at some point into when and where and might be the consequences. When it comes down to what's actually going to happen, that's what's foggiest right now.
They are allowing people to sign steal. They're not allowing people to do it in a way that is actually available through different means.
Right.
That's what the argument's over. So is this a severe level 1 type of penalty? I just don't see it. I see it more as a level 3 thing.
Right.
Level 4 thing.
So what we need to do is get a Spartan and a Buckeye in here.
Oh, yeah.
On the lie detector test like Johnny Fever and WKRP. And get them on the with drinks. And get them on the lie detector test. And go, do you believe had they not stole signs, the outcome would have been reversed and you would have won the game? No. Lunatic fans, they've convinced themselves, yes, after all the social media. So, like George Costanza said, Steve,
it's not a lie if you believe it.
But I think in their heart of hearts, these fans know that maybe it had some impact, even in the worst scenario. It's not the reason that Aiden Hutchinson, plowed over your lineman 17 times and Donovan Edwards ran up and down the field. I think they probably understand that. I think Michigan fans certainly believe that. It would take a lot to get me off of that hill that this changed outcomes of games. TCU's argued, where does that fit in? People have said that it actually hurt us, which is a thing with science. It has consequences the other way. No one's really talking about that. What if you find out it can be used as a strategic advantage for you, right? Which goes back to were we idiots or were we geniuses? Which is it?
Yeah, so,
right.
I mean, there's a lot of people that say, look, Ryan Day tipped off TCU. TCU changed their signs. TCU won. Therefore, this shows how much Michigan depended on sign stealing to win their games. It's also been said, but not repeated very often, that Ohio State changed their signs in the second half against Michigan in 2022, the game in Columbus.
Thank you.
And how did that go for them? Michigan beat them worse. And the play that they're showing, where you can find 1,000 plays where somebody calls an audible at the line of scrimmage and the defensive coaching staff changed their signals afterward. Oh, that's just pure evidence that they are stealing our signs. No, When an audible is changed, the defense will even react. And of course, the film video stops before the ball was snapped. What happened after the ball was snapped? Ohio State scored a touchdown.
Right.
So you can show what you want to present your side of the case.
Well, even State fans.
And leave things out.
I mean, 49-0. It was the best outcome we've had for our defense all year. But you're right.
No,
you can make it whatever you want.
Michigan State changed their signs, did the way of communicating differently, and they still lost 49-0. But there are still people at Michigan State feel that when it's all said and done, this game will also be turned over as well.
So I have a theory, Steve, I want to run by you. With this independent law firm, we don't know the details yet as the time we're recording this. Who is this law firm? There's a law firm involved, apparently, according to reports. And we also know that access to more than, say, a laptop, which we joked about last time, which I think my take, by the way, proved to be true, that we're not actually talking about a device. We're talking about shares and shared drives and access. That seems to be the case. But also maybe tablets, personal devices. Okay, so the theory bounded about, and I give Joe Simon, the legal insider, kind of hinted at this. I don't think he has any specific information, but as a lawyer, he kind of represented what you can and can't do, what you can share and not share when lawyers are involved. And the idea is, okay, well, how did all of these devices and things get turned over? It could simply be they were asked for and turned over, right, which we talked about last time. But here's the other thing, and it's actually tied to the cheeseburger investigation. We know that we engaged with the NCAA, admitted some things. We've admitted that. I mean, that's why we took the 3-game suspension for Harbaugh. We've acknowledged certain lower-level violations. Yeah, there you go. But somewhere the negotiations went pregnant. So somewhere in the aspect, we've been complying with the NCAA and working. Is it possible when this went sideways or before, a law firm was engaged to help do an independent audit to help Michigan understand what happened and to defend ourselves and work with the NCAA on a compromise? And in that process of the cheeseburger thing, turned over information and access. And unbeknownst to Michigan, that the NCAA at some point had this other complaint and this other accusation that they were investigating and used the information they got in this cheeseburger gate with this independent law firm being a partner in all this, and use that to use evidence to find this other stuff with counter Stalions. It's possible that, and that would explain how a law firm would have such intimate information going on at Michigan and turned it over to certain people to review. The other possibility, of course, is Michigan has an internal law firm or someone has an internal law firm with access that does a lot of things like this and simply has been involved now because it's got escalated and turned some things over in the act of cooperating. Does it matter? Not really. It would be an interesting coinkydink. It would be like the end of the Iowa-Minnesota game, right, where the review, we thought we were looking at, did the runner step out of bounds, but really they found something else when they were looking at the tape. It's kind of like what the theory is there. It's interesting. I don't know if we'll ever find out. Well, eventually we'll probably know who the independent law firm is, but there are rights. If they're defending you in something, that they don't have to say in certain circumstances that they're engaged in who they are and who they're defending, because that in and of itself, as Joe Simon explained, is an implication that could affect the outcome of the investigation. Steve, if you've hired a defense attorney, well, what are you defending yourself of? In and of itself, it implies some action you've taken. Therefore, those things can be kept quiet. Very interesting. As we get to consequences here, though, where are you at? So I would be shocked if the Big Ten has any reason to move against Michigan this season, assuming Michigan continues to win. It could change, and we'll talk about the games coming up, but I'd just be very surprised. I believe that the Big Ten is coin-operated. Everything they do indicates they're coin-operated, right? With the new TV contracts, with making a field hockey player travel from Piscataway to Seattle. And Michigan's the crown jewel, and right now on the inside track to be one of those people in the playoff, which means a lot of money for the conference and a lot of happy network executives. I'd just be very surprised if they, or of course the CFP committee, does anything to Michigan. Where are you at? What can the Big Ten do if they wanted to, Steve, on this?
One, I think the winner of the Big Ten is likely going into a playoff. Does the Big Ten care who it is, whether it's Michigan, Ohio State, or even Penn State, as long as somebody's representing them in the playoff? But to advance the story forward in lack of new information, Media outlets are now presenting speculation on whether the Big Ten will act and dish out their own punishment. Why? Because the history of the NCAA doing anything quick is unprecedented, but maybe the Big Ten can. They have the power, the Big Ten, to do something, but they're limited in what they can do. Many are not willing to share that the most they can really do is suspend a coach for 2 games and issue some fines.
So they can't vacate wins. They can't ban somebody necessarily.
Not on the fly. Much is being said about disciplinary action that can be carried out, though, if a conference vote is taken by representatives of other universities from the Big Ten. Now, doesn't that sound juicy, Greg?
Oh, God.
Let's have another vote like 1973. But this is not to determine who's going to the Rose Bowl, but instead to suspend the program and oust them from a championship.
Amazing.
It's great, juicy material. But alas, when you read the fine print of some of these stories, all they can really do as a committee and vote is to reduce the original Big Ten sentence. And it says they can't increase it. So if the Big Ten's action is limited to, at most, as being reported by very few, that you can suspend a coach for a couple of games and issue a fine, and the most a conference vote can do is to reduce that maximum. Again, this is more sizzle than steak.
Okay.
It's being reported and people not saying the entire picture of it. And the Big Ten will not act.
Yeah, I agree. And for those, the 1973 vote, of course, Michigan ties Ohio State 10-10 in that incredible game. The conference rules at the time, you went to a vote of the athletic directors, and Ohio State won that vote and was basically selected as the Big Ten's representative for the Rose Bowl. There are still people crawling around in Ann Arbor, are very bitter about it. So the notion of even talking about a vote, Steve, is amazing that you brought that up. And that would be something, of course, in the 50th anniversary of when that vote happened, by the way.
Right. That sizzle.
Elephants, Ufer, Dooley, and Harbaugh's never forget the 73 vote, Steve. Okay, so, but we got to ask Steve, and maybe we talk about this after halftime. It feels like to me that the stakes are higher for the rest of the season of how we perform in the field. Somehow they got higher, Steve. I want to talk to you after halftime. Do you agree? What does the rest of the schedule look like given what we saw this weekend? And let's talk about that after the break.
All right, that means it's halftime here on The Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. And Nick Hopwood is joining us here in our studio. And Nick, I kind of realized that there are some football analogies that work well in investing as well as football.
That's right, Steve. My favorite one is, let's talk about, hey, what's the score? Are you in the fourth quarter of your career? Maybe it's halftime. Are you winning the game or are you behind? Do you have to play catch up? You know, what's the situation? And if you don't understand what the score is, you don't know what you got to do.
But what Peak does is you help people understand realistically where they are on the field. What is the score of investing, of money management? And you help them and help them adjust.
If you're behind, we know that we need to save more or we need to work longer. Whereas if we're ahead, right, we can pull JJ in the third, right?
That's right.
Like, you know, Nebraska game or whatever. If you are ahead, right, maybe you're looking at an earlier retirement. Or maybe you don't need to save as much for retirement. You can live a little more now.
So going with that, what are strategies if someone's behind? Other than call you and talk to you and say, hey, Nick, I need some help. What are some strategies that you advise people if they're behind?
Yeah, and if you're working on your own, it doesn't hurt to have a second opinion, right? We're big on second opinions, making sure that what you're doing is working. The first thing is, right, how much time do we have left? What do you have saved or invested so far? What do your liabilities look like? And do you have capacity to save more? Right, those are the things that we're looking at.
And we are in the fourth quarter of 2023, so if you want to get a hold of Nick and ask him any questions, or you just want to ask for a couple of ideas, go to peakwm.com. That's peakwm.com.
Thank you, Nick. You've been awesome, and I think Nick might be traveling to one of our last road games, the Penn State game. I don't know, but we'll find out from Nick, and we'll get a report from him maybe. Steve, are the stakes raised like I think they are? I just feel like they are.
I think it's never been more important for Michigan to win these next 4 games and finish the year undefeated. And that is a tough task because Michigan teams don't generally finish undefeated over the last 80 years of Michigan football. But it's never been more important for Michigan to win these next 4 games, and I'll tell you why. You've seen the way people are reacting to how Michigan beat Ohio State, how Michigan lost to TCU. This is why this has happened. If Michigan continues to win games, with all the knowledge out there, with Connor Stalions being suspended, with all the other teams changing their play calls, how they deliver it, or just doing something simple like making an additional dummy call, negating all of this effort that Connor Stalions put into this. If Michigan wins those games, what leg do the accusers have to stand on? However, if they lose a game, and they could lose legitimately on even grounds in Happy Valley to a talented Penn State team, Ohio State is the real deal. They could come into Michigan and beat them. If any one of those two things happen, all it does is feed the ammunition to the accusers of this is why Michigan was good. And you've already seen it out there, Greg. The only reason why Michigan is good is because they started sealing signs in 2021 when that team got better, and that's the reason for it. And it can't be any other reason why they got better. And if Michigan loses a big game under these circumstances as they are right now, they have all the fuel they need to continue to preach that line forever.
Yep, I agree with you. I want the stakes raised. We all do. This is what we wanted. Not this way, right? Not this way. You're absolutely right. So let's talk about the downside of it. We slip up at Penn State. Maryland, I don't know. Team kind of falls apart, injuries, whatever. Then the whole notion that the CFP and we're probably on the outside looking in, maybe we get in this tiebreaker, but that opens the door for the Big Ten to take the moral high ground all of a sudden and go, well, actually, we are going to spend Coach Harbaugh for this. We've seen enough. And you could see some of that. And, oh, man, will the media come down on it. So, boy, the stakes are raised. And even Saturday, and I don't think anyone thinks we're going to lose to Purdue, but the press box, Steve, is going to be a circus. Wouldn't you think on Saturday with out-of-town media, if you're going to have all these people that you keep talking about, these writers on-prem, to be able to ask questions of Harbaugh after the game? It's going to be a circus, man.
Speaking of the circus, as we've talked about the idea of how the national media will treat Michigan winning 1,000 games. Now think about this.
Yeah.
There is enough people that have talked about and expressed, some with knowledge, that Michigan might have to vacate wins. There's a good chance that Michigan could be celebrating its either 1,000th win after just beating Maryland the week before Ohio State, or to get to 1,000, they need to beat Ohio State. And we've talked about in previous podcasts about how it will be received to win 1,000. This is an excuse to bring up and refresh everything and make an instant judgment on a pregame show or the week leading up to it. Are they really playing for their 1,000th win? Did they really have their 1,000th win already last week at Maryland? And this is why it's so important. Assuming now that everyone can agree that it's all on the level, nobody knows each other's signs, Michigan must win all 4 of these games, and 2 of them convincingly, to maintain any credibility that the actions in this scandal had no bearing on Michigan's high level of play. But if you lose any of these games, you're just making it easy for anyone to say what happened greatly affected the outcomes of the past. A giant metaphorical or literal asterisk will be in place over Michigan's entire Renaissance run.
I totally agree. I feel it.
I can feel it down in my plums.
Like this, the tension in the next few weeks. And again, we kind of get a week off-ish, right, with Purdue. We should handle these guys pretty easily. But no, it's big time. And can I nerd out a little bit on the 1,000th wins? Well, we've talked about it a little bit, and Michigan certainly has tons of wins over kind of fledgling football programs because we started playing before most people had a football program. And hey, we have a football team now. Would you like to play us, Michigan? Sure. Here's a 60 burger on your new team. We literally taught Notre Dame how to play football in South Bend. We actually walked them through it, then played them, beat them, and we both count that score as a win, right? Well, get this. There are actually 2 teams, and these games happened in the 1800s, where the final score and the outcome is disputed, where the other team, one of them is Oberlin College, which still plays football today, actually claims a victory over Michigan at Michigan in 1892. and we claim it too. And there's another team from New Jersey called Stevens Institute, which actually claims a win over us, but we claim it too. It was a dispute at the end of the game. Don't get me into it.
This sounds like neighborhood football where they start counting and says, no, we have 35. No, you don't have 35. You only have 28.
I know it. Well, it's a little more scandalous than that in the Oberlin case. They actually got the lead and left the game, as Michigan will tell you. And the umpire, they called it back then, said, no, there's a little more time. No one was on the field. Michigan ran a play against no defense and scored. And we claim we win. If you look at all the evidence, I feel like Michigan's kind of in the right. But get this. I happen to know there are writers out there who are going to bring up that Oberlin game and say, does Michigan really have 1,000?
Exactly.
And because this wasn't like a tiny, I know you hear Oberlin, that's actually a significant enough game back then. It'd be like playing a good MAC team, or a good lower level Big Ten team now, and them claiming the win. So interesting enough. So John Bacon on WTKA, our man Bake, said, we're losing the PR battle, right? Which I think is clear that if there's a PR battle and there's a score, nationally, Michigan is losing. Maybe not with our own fan base, but we're losing it. Is there something Michigan can or should do from Ward, from somebody else from the athletic department to put something out to at least signal where Michigan stands on this right now? Or, you know what I mean? What would you do, I guess, is the question. This is a tough one, right?
I would think that the best thing you could do is to say things off the record to somebody who's willing to say it out loud.
So play the same game that Michigan, of course, being played against us. Okay. I didn't think about that. I'm told sources inside wherever, State Street, Jim Beckerell have told me that Michigan is going to have a vigorous defense of this or something like that.
Yeah.
But first you have to decide what your stance is. Do you think Michigan's decided what their stance is, which side of the coin they're on? We're prepared to fight, but we don't know exactly what we're fighting against. There are ways, to your point, Steve, to say that, whether it's through a conversation that is a source or a statement like, just to reiterate, we are complying. As information has come in, we're concerned about the way apparently information is being spread about this without being given to us to review or defend ourselves. That right there would indicate to people like me that Michigan is going to defend itself here. Okay, you could say question. You could use the word we have questions. You could use the word we have concerns if you want to go a little harder. Or, like you said, those statements could be shared with people who might take that elsewhere. But to my knowledge, none of that has happened to date. And this isn't a criticism. It's really, I'm curious, like, what would you do in this situation? Some of us have had crisis management like classes, but this is unique. This isn't a court case. This is the NCAA, where we're not really supposed to talk about the investigation. In fact, we haven't been accused of anything in this matter. So what can we say, right? So there are things that can be done. Very clever. Is Jim Harbaugh, like as people have speculated, is this all a manipulation to get him out? B, is this his chance? Because we do know this about Jim Harbaugh. His motto is play football, coach football, die. Number 2 is getting a little hard right now, and it's very distracted here. It's hard to coach football here right now, I imagine, with all this stuff going on, right? And especially if he doesn't have a contract. It's kind of hard to coach football if you don't have the right contract. So there are things that can be done. What else? We talked about MSU. I'll just say this briefly, Steve. I grew up a Michigan State fan, and I can confirm, in my experience, what Michigan State wants is a seat at the table, the big boy table. They want to be considered a peer in Michigan. They want to be viewed on the same playing field, metaphorically speaking. Do you? Because I don't have to rattle off all the things that are going on with Mel Tucker that everyone's forgotten about. And by the way, he's trying to basically drag down their athletic department and de facto their university with all these statements. And he's more than said, this goes deeper basically in what he's saying. Let's see all your notes between each other and all the conversations you had. And the leader of the Nazi party was smiling on our scoreboard, but it kind of faded away. Flip it. If that all happened here with Harbaugh and Michigan, and man, it would be a never-ending news story, Steve. And maybe the drip of information is what makes this have such legs. But that story, with respect to sign stealing, would be an afterthought at Michigan. So my point is, careful what you wish for, man, because it's the scrutiny you get. Do you want it? That's my question.
Michigan State fans don't want to be ignored, and Michigan fans just feel that mountains are made out of molehills.
Yeah.
So that is the question, Michigan State. Do you want to find that even if your little things will make your world turn upside down, and imagine the real stuff that happens, the more scrutiny that would be going against for Michigan State on a national perspective? You may want to feel ignored.
And by the way, this isn't to suggest that there aren't stories here. I mean, there are plenty of things. Like, yeah, sure. Okay, cheeseburger is a thing. This is obviously a thing. We didn't even talk about the Matt Weiss thing, which I think is completely separate from this. If anyone's like kind of draw the two, I think that's purely a legal situation where those Ghostbuster streams do not cross, right? The information gathered there is separate. But these are all horrible black eyes for Michigan, no doubt about it. And I'm not saying it's not newsworthy. It's more of the tolerance and the feeding frenzy that seems to be surrounded by Michigan. Justified or unjustified, okay. But that's what you get.
Yeah, clearing that up. A couple of stories this week. Again, not reported too widely, but again, separate the social media posts from the talking heads, separate the talking heads from the investigative reporters. Whatever's going on with Matt Weiss and his computer and why he was let go from the University of Michigan has been told by the University of Michigan, the Ann Arbor Police, and I think the FBI that none of this is related to sign stealing.
Yeah. See, again, that makes sense. That to me seems to be very clear. Like the whole theory that's been floated out there, like, well, something related to this exposed Michigan in this way. No. Like, I don't think we've made any light of the Weiss situation. It's horrible. But to suggest that it's involved here doesn't seem to be the case. Hey, Steve, can I give a quick shout out to a couple people?
Sure.
So I had an event with the Dallas Alumni Club, a Zoom session. Dude, I blabbered on for over an hour, answered questions, talked about history. It was awesome. The Michigan Alumni Association itself was represented there. It was really cool. And we had people from different parts of the country, not in the Dallas Club, join. It was really fun. If you've got an alumni association, you want to do something similar, easy to find. I'm going to be on the Champions Circle, LAB, Leaders and Best podcast this week, and I'll link out to that. Talking history with, I believe, former Michigan tight end and BTN and color analyst Jake Butt. So that should be fun.
Nice.
Pretty boy. Good looking dude. Like, that's why I talk about history and Jake's on TV. Friday before the Purdue game, we talked about this. 5 p.m. happy hour at the Brown Jug restaurant with none other than Jill Gordon, who paints the jug. So that's Friday at around 5 p.m. We're going to be in the back there at the Jug. You can meet Jill Gordon. Maybe the pundit will be there and have a beer with me. I don't know.
Definitely.
Okay. And then the last thing, the SAE Mud Bowl is going to be Saturday. A lot of you look at me because you happen to know that was my fraternity affiliation. I'm retired now. When I went to Michigan, I was an SAE, and that's the house on South U in Washtenaw that has the giant pit. It was created by a special kind of glacier, Steve. Did you know that? That's kind of a weird little detail that I heard that I found out later in life. But they dig out the pit. Many of you know this used to be a homecoming tradition at Michigan. The game's actually going to be at noon Saturday before the Purdue game at SAE House. I don't know who SAE is playing. They play the winner of a little tournament of other fraternities, and that is going on, and proceeds benefit the Charles Woodson Foundation, Steve. So I'll be out there. The professor is actually a sponsor. I'm on the shirt. If you can believe that one. So that's a lot of stuff. We haven't even talked about, we haven't got really into the Big Ten yet.
We're just going to kind of go over this fairly quickly. Ohio State over Wisconsin Saturday night, 24-10. Marvin Harrison, 2 touchdowns, 123 yards. Greg, the Buckeyes are getting healthier as Trevion Henderson returned after missing 3 games, 162 yards and a touchdown. Denzel Burke, the cornerback there, also returned to the Buckeyes defense. Wisconsin played without Braylon Allen, their star running back in the second half, and also one of their best receivers, but they hung in there until under 6 minutes left when the Buckeyes went up by 2 scores. Greg, I think the Buckeye defense is really good. Kyle McCord threw 2 interceptions, but the offensive line, I think, is Ohio State's biggest problem right now.
Okay. And you said they hung in there. Speaking of hanging in there, boy, did Indiana hang in with Penn State? Did I see that?
Yeah. What was more shocking to you? Penn State and Indiana tied at 24 in Happy Valley with less than 2 minutes to go, or that Drew Aller threw a 57-yard bomb to Keandre Lambert-Smith. Penn State does not make big offensive plays, but they needed it when they had to.
So is this kind of a Graham Mertz thing with James Franklin where they put all their chips on Drew Aller? And I know he's just thrown like his first interception, but anyway, he got it done. And yeah, it seemed like he kind of just winged it down the field, Steve, like James Franklin joked about the press guy.
Didn't want him to do.
Yeah, and he connected it. And the eye rolls and the sighs of relief amongst the joy of the Penn State fans when that happened. Can you imagine?
I think Drew Aller is probably the real deal. He's just an inexperienced quarterback starting for his very first year. Just as J.J. McCarthy is getting better with each year that he's playing, I think Drew Aller will too. But this is one of the reasons why you didn't see Penn State as winning the Big Ten. It's because they had a brand new young quarterback without experience.
Feel better about that game on the road. Glad we're playing Ohio State at home. Still think we have the edge in both games, but you're right. Ohio State's getting healthier. And a little winded for Penn State's sales of how they got out of that situation. But Indiana, Steve, so that was shocking to me. That would have been something. What else around the Big Ten?
Michigan State lost to Minnesota, and this is not the pick on Spartans podcast, but the Spartans are going through quarterback eras faster than you and I go through beers. The Noah Kim era started and ended already, and Caton Hauser went from promising to problematic in just 3 games. And now it's true freshman Sam Leavitt, who engineered the Spartans' first touchdown drive in 9 quarters in the fourth quarter. It's very similar to how Noah Kim and Caton Hauser started playing at Michigan State. Let's put him in as a backup role in the fourth quarter. Oh, they engineer a touchdown drive. Therefore, they're going to be the next starter. I'm going to guess things may not end up well for Sam Leavitt either, but it's not necessarily his fault. It's Michigan State's program and their team. They just have too many holes. Minnesota's top 2 tailbacks didn't play in the game.
Yeah, is that a PJ Fleck thing? Like that's been
it's Minnesota's identity is being able to run the ball. So obviously their offensive line does well, but their third-string tailback, who barely even played this season because there's been other third-string tailbacks who have played and weren't available, are getting 200 yards of rushing, which is what they got over Michigan State last weekend. Minnesota's still winning that 27-12.
Hearing that Michigan State does have an offer out, Steve, to our buddy Urban Meyer, and not source, not double source. This is not a journalistic thing, that they put all the chips in to see if they could convince old Herb to come to East Lansing. So we'll see what happens.
Guess it depends on the amount.
It's not the
among
money,
other
Steve.
things.
It's the amount.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and finally, Northwestern beat Maryland 33-27 in front of less than 20,000 fans at Ryan Field. Now, I know that stadium is small, but it's not 20,000 seats small. It's a 47,000 seat stadium. Less than 20,000 show up. Is this the future for Big Ten teams that are below 500, Greg, and not making a bowl? Let's see how full Spartan Stadium, Ross-Ade Stadium at Purdue, and the Memorial Stadiums at Champaign-Urbana and in Bloomington are in the coming weeks.
I think of like NCAA basketball, and there's such an emphasis on the tournament. They've done such a good job with that thing. But basketball has done a good job, and it's more akin to how you can play so many games, that the fact is every team in the Big Ten, no matter how crappy you are at the end, you have that last shot, right, to win the Big Ten tournament somehow, and there's hope. We're seeing this. The weather's bad. And there's a reason, by the way, that the new Ryan Field, or whatever they're going to call it, is going to be a small kind of multi-purpose event center and not really like a big stadium. It's going to have small capacity. It's probably a smart move. They seem to be okay with it. That is, until they're kicked out of the Big Ten for not bringing in enough revenue, as we've speculated.
Nationally, previously unbeaten Oklahoma lost to unranked Kansas on the road. As a result, everyone in the Big 12 now has lost a game. I think Texas still has a pretty fair argument as a one-loss team in making the playoff. They beat Alabama on the road, lost to the Sooners in the final minute of play. I think they lead the resume for one-loss teams along with Oregon. But is there a case strong enough for Texas to overtake an undefeated team? And Greg, finally, can we put a stop to the inaccurate rumors that the Pac-12 doesn't play defense?
Let's do that right here for the record.
USC's defense broke up a 2-point conversion pass with under a minute to play. The Trojans avoiding a 3-game losing streak, beating Cal 50-49.
Defense wins championships, Steve, and it won a game for them. Bend but don't break. I don't know. A break, but don't lose. What did they do there? 49 points.
We'll see if USC can make it to the Pac-12 championship game. Washington is the only undefeated team left in the Pac-12. Again, that's good news for Michigan. However, I think Oregon's in a situation much like Texas is in a one-loss situation.
I see all the percentage, like the data all has Ohio State as the inside, the best odds to get to the playoff. And I think that's a function of the obstacles they have in front of them, which is really just, I assume, one, right? The Michigan game. Whereas Michigan, comparatively, right? Michigan has to go through Penn State and Ohio State. I assume that's why, from an odds standpoint, Ohio State's favored, right, to go. That's the inside track. And, by the way, with their big wins over Notre Dame and Penn State, they're looking better as a one-loss team. So what else? We have Purdue coming in. We haven't talked a lot about him. Is your boy coming in town?
Yes, and he's bringing Boilermakers with him.
He is.
So we'll be hosting them over the weekend. They'll be sitting in the Michigan Stadium seats, and they'll try to have the best time possible. But I just have to wonder if NCAA will institute a running clock during this game.
So I have to ask, your son's been there a year, then some. Is he screaming till his voice is hoarse, rooting against Michigan?
Absolutely not.
Okay. There you go.
We found that out when we went to the Big Ten championship game. He didn't know how he was going to feel last year. He was dressed for Michigan. He was dressed for Purdue. He was sitting in the Purdue student section. He was wearing his Purdue gear, and we found out after the first play where his allegiances lie. And,
very good.
Can't say anything more than that to protect himself. But he gets razzed at school. Everybody knows he's from Ann Arbor. And he takes the grief from them. And then as a Purdue resident, he gives grief to his Michigan friends when he sees them in person as a Purdue fan.
Okay.
So it's a great mixture. Let me tell you, my son is handling that situation better than I ever did 30 years ago in college.
I handled it just fine as a State fan. Going to Michigan, I flipped Steve like a beetle on a hot sidewalk to Michigan instantly. It took 5 seconds, and I was a lifetime of football games, basketball games, Magic Johnson, Kirk Gibson, whatever you, Scott Skiles, gone, wiped out.
He is looking forward to coming here and bringing his buddies. He is a member of the Purdue Boiler Brigade, so he really cheers for Purdue. Almost all the time.
Almost all the time. And so that's great. I look forward to seeing them. I assume they're going to try to stop by the pregame show, Steve, the countdown to kickoff.
Interesting note as we wrap things up. The age of current Big Ten stadiums, because Ross-Ade is going through yet another renovation. Ross-Ade started as an 18,000-seat stadium in 1924. They're celebrating their 100th year. They've been doing major changes to that stadium gradually throughout. But I was kind of looking at the age of stadiums, and I was kind of surprised. Michigan Stadium, which will be celebrating its 100th anniversary in 1927, is kind of on the younger side of stadiums. And I was kind of surprised. The oldest in the Big Ten was Camp Randall.
But it's more of that. It was modularized and added on to, right? But it counts. Okay. Then let me see. You have very close to each other Ohio Stadium.
That's number 2.
Memorial Stadium from Illinois.
That is tied for 3rd.
25.
Nebraska and Illinois both named Memorial Stadiums, and Spartan Stadium.
Yeah.
Both were founded in 1923.
It's funny. So Michigan got fortunate, Steve, because there was resistance, and actually Yost himself didn't want a stadium right away. He just wanted to add on to Ferry Field, kind of like these other teams. We beat the Great Depression, Steve, like barely. Okay, yes, by a couple years, but barely. And if it weren't for Yost, we A, wouldn't have the athletic department we have. B, we wouldn't have a stadium. He basically sold the idea to the regions, convinced everyone, convinced the media, and then figured out how to fund it through these stadium bonds, which a lot of people know about, that had a preferred seat license. Basically, you got you the right, if you bought this bond, to buy seats within the 30-yard lines for 20 years. It was brilliant, and he did it. But yeah, that's funny. I've never heard anyone go, it's relatively younger. It is. Yeah, it is.
It's 8.
That's wild.
It's 8 out of 14, not
funny.
including the Pac-12 stadiums yet. It's interesting that you mention beating the Great Depression out, because Iowa is 9th on this list at 1929, but then the next oldest stadium goes all the way to 1960.
Yes, it does.
What happened between, or no, I'm sorry, 1950?
I'll tell you what happened.
What happened between 1929 and 1950?
Oh, we had a Great Depression, which sunk the world in it. And then we had a little something go on in Europe, Steve, called World War II.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay. A little conflict over there in Europe.
the next stadium to be built after 1929 was Maryland's in 1950.
Yeah.
Penn State's Beaver Stadium, which is archaic right now, and they're finally approving renovations.
Pipes are freezing.
Beaver Stadium was made in 1960,
Yeah.
along with Indiana's Memorial Stadium in 1960.
And I'm not saying like Michigan football couldn't have endured or recovered, but that would have been a big deal. Like if we didn't have that stadium and that edifice, in place, does Fritz Kreisler come to Michigan, right? If we don't have the infrastructure to support him and with a quality football team from a national championship winning Princeton team, probably not. There's a ton of history there. I can nerd out. By the way, guess who didn't get his stadium before the Depression? Amos Alonzo Stagg in Chicago. And guess what happened to them at the end of the Depression? They left the Big Ten because they were getting their butts kicked. And there were tons of other reasons. But he wanted a stadium for the exact same reasons Yost wanted a stadium, for recruiting, for revenue, right? He didn't get it. The Chicago brass said, we're not doing this. And Stagg was out, man.
So I'll talk about Purdue on the WTKA podcast and their station live Wednesday at 9 a.m. with the Michigan Insider with Sam and Ira. Kind of fill you in what's going on with the Boilermaker program. Michigan should win that game comfortably.
Steve, we talked about a lot of stuff here. Obviously, we went probably a little longer than most of our episodes. We feel like it's necessary. You can tell we had a lot to say. Hope you enjoy this stuff. Please keep telling your friends. Follow, rate us, and give us feedback. And again, if you're interested in sponsoring us, let us know. We got a new season coming up, and I feel like it is very fitting, Steve, that we are entering a new season. Winter is coming, Steve. And we're here for it. What else, man?
Michigan football, back-to-back Big Ten champions. Go Blue, Greg.
Go Blue.